Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Israel Hawkins. Well, Denmark is banning some more forms of modesty. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Suicide, sadly, has taken the lives of two prominent people, public figures, in the last couple of weeks. And the new trade war that we've entered into, well, what does it mean for us? But first, we're going to start off in Denmark, which has recently joined France and other European countries in outlawing the veil and burqa being worn in public. This latest ban was put forth by the center-right government, which says the veils are contrary to Danish values, while opponents say it infringes on a woman's right to dress as they choose. Well, under the law, women can be told to remove their veils or leave public areas.
One veiled woman said to a reporter, "I will not compromise my own principles just because the government does that to their own principles on same value-based politics." Now, the Justice Minister said in practice, women will be fined or told to go home.
Well, Iran has rejected a report on the freedom of religion in the Islamic Republic. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman said that the report was unsubstantiated and politically charged, and that illogical interpretations of religion will ultimately lead to an escalation of crisis and problems.
He also accused the U.S. of trying to exploit religious diversity of some countries for political purposes, and that history is a testimony of peaceful coexistence of religions in Iran. Now, the U.S. State report said that religious minority groups face discrimination and harassment in Iran.
Well, Poland is seeking permanent deployment of thousands of U.S. troops on its soil. The Polish defense minister said that such presence will serve as a great deterrence against Russia. NATO and American troops were stationed in Poland last year and are currently in rotation. NATO has been increasing its military presence on Russian borders over the last several years. NATO accuses Moscow of supporting pro-Russian forces in Ukraine's east.
Moscow has denied those claims, saying that the Western military alliance is seeking pretense to justify its eastward expansion.
Well, with the recent acquisition of Monsanto, the German pharmaceutical company Bayer is now the world's largest manufacturer of agricultural, chemical, and seed products. After 2 years of talks, Bayer sealed the deal, purchasing the U.S. company for $63 billion, and has decided to drop the brand's 117-year-old name. Well, Bayer said that it will raise $30 billion from shares and bond sales to help manage some of the debt that it's taken on.
Now, Monsanto is the world's largest supplier of GMO products and is well known for its Roundup brand of pesticides that contain glyphosate, which the World Health Organization says may cause cancer. Now, claims which, of course, Monsanto has disputed.
And there were many lawsuits from many families and organizations because of the increased amounts of cancer that arose in areas where that Roundup was being used predominantly in the fields. Well, at the latest UN Security Council meeting, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, purposed to thwart a resolution drafted by Kuwait intended to protect the people of Gaza. She went from representative to representative, ambassador to ambassador of several countries, trying to her hand at persuasion. Well, she wanted her rewritten version of the resolution to be added as an amendment so that it could be voted on first. But even though there were heated discussions amongst the ambassadors, this month's president of the council, which was the country of Russia, ruled against her.
Now, during the U.S.'s turn to address the council, she pleaded with the council to accept her version and reject Kuwait's version, saying, "We strongly encourage this council to vote against Kuwait's resolution and acknowledge the concerns of Hamas by voting for the U.S.'s version. Each of you have a choice. You either support Hamas or not. This vote will tell the story," she concluded.
But when the time came to vote, 10 voted for Kuwait's resolution, and the only reason it didn't pass was because Haley used her veto powers. When the U.S.'s version was put to the vote, well, U.S.'s allies abstained, while others simply voted against it. And in a symbol of diplomatic humiliation, Haley was the only one to vote for the U.S.'s resolution. Wow.
Well, the Palestinian ambassador to the UN, Riyad Mansour, spoke after the vote, saying that he didn't believe in the history of the U.S. or the UN in which a country submitted a draft resolution and received one vote, the vote of the country that drafted the resolution. He concluded by saying, "If that is not the epic of complete failure, I want you to tell me what is failure in the Security Council."
Wow, sounds like a kind of an embarrassing situation there. Well, although Haley didn't win the vote, the people of Gaza are still the real losers, with the Security Council currently in a deadlock. There is no relief on the horizon for their continued suffering.
Well, misery is taking center stage in other ways as well. Larry McGee has our report on the epidemic of suicide that has everyone talking, with details concerning several other stories as well. Larry, why is suicide catching everyone's attention right now?
Excellent question, considering suicide has been on an alarming and steady incline for years now. It seems as if people have somehow become desensitized with regard to it all, but when stars fall, apparently, it becomes a little bit more difficult not to notice. Fashion designer Kate Spade is one such luminary whose recent suicide has brought renewed attention to the epidemic. The designer's husband says there was no indication and no warning that she would do this, and that she had been actively seeking help for depression and anxiety over the course of the last 5 years. Some with history concerning the issue have come forward to lend insight concerning the crisis and say that when you're suicidal, you're not thinking about anyone else, and it's not because you're selfish, it's because you're not well. The CDC is now releasing statistics which indicate a 30% rise in suicide rates for half of the nation from 1999 to 2016, with the highest rates being among women from 45 to 64. An estimated half of those who took their lives reportedly held no prior issues related to mental health. And among those who had been diagnosed as plagued, circumstances such as relationship problems, financial troubles, and health issues were identified as contributing factors. The conclusion of the CDC's report is that there is no one thing causing the illness. Celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain is also among those making headlines for taking his own life this week. The culinary entertainer, who was also an author, is best known for his popular TV show where he toured the world, indulging in little-known and oftentimes very bizarre delicacies. As many mourn, there are questions surfacing now as to the role that those choices might have played in negatively impacting Mr. Bourdain's physical and mental health. In an effort to understand the cause of the tragedy, there has been yet more talk about the problem of suicide and what it is exactly. One individual described it as like having a faulty organ, like the bad heart which precedes a heart attack. But in this case, it's the mind that has gone wrong, with the result that a person commits suicide. Russia is assuredly committed to maintaining and advancing its position in world affairs. This week, President Vladimir Putin sat down for a Q&A with reporters, where he fielded questions on everything from domestic issues to the inevitableness of World War III. Among those things standing out from the session was the leader's response concerning Russia's new nuclear weapons and whether or not they actually exist, to which President Putin commented that there are those who doubted new Russian weapons are going to be put into service. Back in 2004, he said, they were doubting the avant-garde systems, but now we see them in Syria, and that is not all that Moscow is planning to produce and put into service. He went on to say that, as he stated in his address, it is too early to talk about it, but they will speak about it soon. The leader stated that Russia's moves regarding weapons is not about kindling a fight, but rather aimed towards achieving parity in an effort to discourage any of its opponents from attacking. This sort of mentality, however, is causing concern with respect to just how close the world is to another world war. And speaking on this, the president quoted Einstein, who famously stated that he didn't know with which weapons World War III would be fought, but World War IV, he said, will be fought with sticks and stones. President Putin stated that the understanding of the fact that World War III may be the end of modern civilization must detour them from extreme actions on the international stage. There are complaints in the world concerning America's economic hegemony, and President Putin says everybody can see what's going on. According to the Russian head, America's brand of politics is counterproductive, a politics of limitations and sanctions. As a show of exactly that, the biggest news on the economic scene is the $50 billion in tariffs that the U.S. recently chose to impose on Chinese products. President Trump says that the move was necessary because America is being treated very unfairly. Analysts say that there will definitely be a reaction by Beijing. The biggest issue is concerning prior agreements between the two nations geared towards reducing the trade deficit between them. America reneging on those agreements by attempting unilaterally to accelerate the process through tariffs will create a problem, analysts say, that will cause an inevitable slowdown in buying and selling globally. Some global analysts are calling it straight and announcing America's move, which was then countered by China, who imposed its own tariffs on American products, as the opening salvo of a trade war. The expectation is that there is quite possibly much more tit for tat to come, as the cycle of retaliation with these sorts of things is difficult to stop once it gets started. In fact, the U.S. Trade Representative's office is reported to already be at work compiling a list with over $100 billion in new tariffs, and China has already responded with threats that it will duplicate behavior in kind. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, with those trade wars, the citizens are usually the ones that carries the burden from its effects. Well, in light of Trump's newest tariffs on China, Sean Donnan of the Financial Times says the U.S. has been gearing up for a trade war for the last few months, and there's been some debate as to when that war is going to start. But he continued, "Today is the day. We are in a trade war."
Well, Donnan also said the opening shots were fired between the world's two largest economies when Mr. Trump imposed a $50 billion in tariffs on Chinese imports, and China then came right back with a similar announcement.
Mr. Donnan said, "The big fear right now is that we are going to move into a period of tit-for-tat tariffs and things are going to escalate." He pointed out that the U.S. Trade Representative's office is working on a $100 billion list of trade tariffs, which the Chinese already plans to counter. But Donnan continued, "That's the risk in a war, that once you go down that path, it's a path that leads to escalation. Once something starts, it's a lot harder to stop than it is beforehand."
Well, as he stated, though, there aren't any signs that either side is asking to sit down and discuss other options. President Trump is counting on his friendship with Chinese President Xi Jinping to save the situation, but Mr. Donnan questioned what kind of friendship they would have by the end of next week.
That's right. Well, moving a little further east, now after the historic meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, President Trump tweeted, "Everybody can now feel much safer than the day I took office. There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea." He added a second tweet saying, "Before taking office, people were assuming that we were going to war with North Korea. President Obama said that North Korea was our biggest and most dangerous problem. No longer. Sleep well tonight," he said.
Well, as Trump returned home from the summit in Singapore, he declared he had solved the North Korean problem, but some experts may be staying up late anyway, trying to understand just what the leaders agreed to. Now, Trump believes President Kim, as he says, wants to get it done.
But Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president, is not in full agreement, telling the press that evidence of North Korea's disarmament has to be, quote, complete, verifiable, and irreversible. However, the joint statement signed at the meeting by the two leaders did not say anything about being either verifiable or irreversible.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is still in Asia, briefing North Korea's neighbors on the outcome of the summit. Today he was meeting with South Korean and Japanese officials, and next he will be traveling to Beijing to brief the Chinese.
Pompeo has been given the task of negotiating the details of North Korea's denuclearization program. Today he said he expects a, quote, major disarmament by the end of Trump's first term. Of course, on North Korea state television, however, the announcer gave a longer time frame and said President Trump had agreed to lifting sanctions.
At the summit, Trump went to great lengths to befriend Kim and the North Koreas, but some are not pleased that the president is now being friendly with someone they consider a human rights violator. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan is defending the president's actions, saying it's a terrible regime, they've done terrible things, and they've been deceitful in the past, but it's really important that we disrupted the status quo like the president has.
But the big questions are still unanswered, Jeff, as, for instance, how will the North disarm their nuclear sites, and how does the U.S. actually verify this, the progress that's taking place there? Secretary Pompeo expects to actually start engaging in discussions with North Korea next week, but he says they have already agreed to more terms, which of course were not in the signed document.
Well, as refugees are trying to cross the border from Mexico into the United States, families are being separated by the hundreds. Now, from very young screaming toddlers to older teens, the separation does not discriminate. Now, CNN's chief White House correspondent Jim Acosta asked Press Secretary Sarah Sanders to explain a statement that Attorney General Jeff Sessions had made earlier in the day in regards to upholding the laws of the land and how it was morally correct according to the Bible.
Well, let's take a look at what Mr. Sessions had to say and how Mr. Acosta's question was answered by Ms. Sanders.
I thought I'd take a little bit of digression here to discuss some concerns raised by our church friends about separation of families. Many of the criticisms raised in recent days are not fair, not logical, and some are contrary to plain law. First, illegal entry into the United States is a crime. It should be, it must be, if you're going to have a legal system and have any limits whatsoever. Persons who violate the law of our nation are subject to prosecution. If you violate the law, you subject yourself to prosecution. And I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves. Consistent, fair application of law is in itself a good and moral thing, and that protects the weak. It protects the lawful.
On these children who are being separated from their families as they come across the border, the Attorney General earlier today said that somehow there's a justification for this in the Bible. Where does it say in the Bible that it's moral to take children away from their mothers?
I'm not aware of the Attorney General's comments or what he would be referencing. I can say that it is very biblical to enforce the law. I can say that it is very biblical to enforce the law. I can say that it is very biblical to enforce the law. That is actually repeated a number of times throughout the Bible. However, this, hold on, Jim, if you'll let me finish. Again, I'm not going to comment on the attorney's specific comments that I haven't seen.
It's in the Bible to
That's
follow
not
the
what
law.
I said, and I know it's hard for you to understand. even short sentences, I guess, and please don't take my words out of context, but the separation of illegal alien families is the product of the same legal loopholes that Democrats refuse to close, and these laws are the same that have been on the books for over a decade, and the president is simply enforcing them.
Policy to take children away from their parents. Can
It's
you
a
imagine
moral
the horror
policy
that
to
these children
follow
must
and
be going
enforce the
through
law.
when they come across the border,
Jim.
they're with their parents, and then suddenly they're pulled away from their parents? Why is the government doing this?
Because it's the law, and that's what the law states.
So as we could see there, Katan, Attorney General Jeff Sessions was trying to justify what was taking place with the separation of the children from the parents as as the Mexican refugees start coming across or trying to come into the United States. And he was trying to use the Bible as justification, but when Mr. Acosta asked him, well, where in the Bible does that say it's okay to separate children from parents?
Right.
As you see there, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders first said that she didn't know of the statements that were made, and then didn't see Mr. Sessions' comments, but then she responded in exactly how he had mentioned that earlier, so almost implying that she did see what he had said.
Yeah, and it's interesting that even within our politics and the supposed separation of church and state, it seems to, in a situation like this, they don't mind picking and choosing parts out of the scripture to kind of justify their actions, even when their actions are, seen as immoral.
Yeah, kind of using the Bible to their advantage when they feel it's benefiting them.
That's right.
Well, if you would like to learn the truth about following and keeping those laws written in your Bible, you can contact the House of Yahweh, and when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can also call them at 1-800-613-9494. And don't forget to visit any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, and Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. For all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And of course, don't forget the best resource to studying the Holy Scriptures and understanding the information that's found in there. You can find that by going to the free online programs, the Yisrael Says program and the Ask Yisrael program, and you can find that by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another great inspired message by Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.